Are you curious about being a podcast guest? Today, my guest will share the reason why being a podcast guest is ineffective for many entrepreneurs and how to be a profitable podcast guest instead. So welcome back. For those who are new around here, my name is Jen Vasquez, and I help female entrepreneurs go from overwhelmed to an easy, streamlined marketing strategy that includes Pinterest and repurposing content to grow their business with very little time. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Kristin Molenaar of Yes Boss. Yes Boss is a virtual agency that helps business owners book podcast features so they can generate new leads in just an hour a week. I am all for that type of thing. She is on a personal mission to uncomplicate entrepreneurship and help entrepreneurs with some practical steps for working less and making more as a service provider, agency owner, coach, or consultant. So if you're one of those things, definitely stick around and enjoy the conversation. Welcome, Kristin.
Thanks for having me, Jen. I'm really excited about this conversation.
Me too. It's so funny, and she'll get into this more later, but once we booked this podcast, I went searching on social media and there's very little out there. So I'm sure she's going to talk to us a little bit about her strategy for marketing and how it has grown her business. But let's go ahead and get started. First, would you go ahead and tell me a little bit about your business and how you got started?
Oh gosh. Okay. So my business, it's very easy to explain where I am now, which took a lot of effort to really uncomplicate things for myself. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about it, right? That tends to be how things go.
Yeah.
But so I run a podcast booking agency. So very simply put, we help people become guests on podcasts. This is what I do to build my business. This is my marketing method, and we do it for our clients as well. But it didn't all start there. This was not some genius idea that I came up with out of the blue. Absolutely not. I wish it was so, but I've been in business for myself now for 6 years. And it all started with 14 months of absolute utter failure, trying to do all the things for all the people. And I was trying to be a coach and consultant in the beauty industry because that's where my corporate background was. Found out that when I got truly real with myself, that wasn't my passion. I just wasn't into that industry. But after struggling for a really long time, I decided, you know what? I don't want to give up my location freedom and I need some finances. So I'll just be a VA. So I started as a $15 an hour VA, which for me was a big blow to my ego back in 2015. It was pretty bad, but the cool thing is I was not able to take off that entrepreneur hat, and I grew that $15 an hour gig into a 6-figure agency. So I ran a virtual assistant agency that's how my business looked for many years. And then about a little over a year ago, we discovered the power of podcast guesting. So I talked to my team about being a podcast guest myself, took 6 months of not doing anything about it.
I'm sure so many people can identify with that.
Oh my gosh. It's so interesting because we talk about all these different things that we want to do in our business, and we sit down to do them. And then we realize, oh, I feel like an imposter. Nobody's going to know who I am, all these things. And like you already kind of said, which we can talk about more, I don't really do social media. And at the time I had a really awful website. So it's like, people are going to look me up and they're going to think, why the heck does this girl want to be on my podcast? Regardless of all those things, I have a very, very wonderful team. They stepped in and said, hey, Kristin, you're not pitching yourself. How about you let us pitch you? We'll take over.
Of course.
And yes. And I'll say that is honestly, for me, that has been the biggest mindset hack is if I can't do it, just find somebody else to put me in the position and I'll show up. So anyways, my team started pitching me as a guest. It was fantastic. I got on some podcasts, started sharing about my story, about entrepreneurship, yada, yada. And then we realized that it was the greatest marketing strategy that we had employed to date. So we drew a line in the sand, started doing just that for our clients. And that's all we do today.
So tell me a little bit about that's what you do. So tell me a little bit about, bottom line, how you can help anybody who happens to be watching or listening right now.
Yeah. So what we have found is that there is tremendous power in being a podcast guest and actually sitting in the guest seat. And it's different than what a lot of people would think, where they would think that the power lies in this. So we get a lot of people that come to us that say, I want to be on a really, really big podcast because I want either to be heard by a huge listener base, or I want to be able to post that, I was featured on the Joe Rogan show or whatever. I hear that one, like, can you get me on Joe Rogan? I'm like, please stop asking me to get you on Joe Rogan.
Please stop.
No, it's not gonna happen unless you know Joe Rogan or one of his buddies. You're probably not gonna get on Joe Rogan. So anyways, what we actually found is this is a networking on steroids play. So what happens is I had really built my business up till being a podcast guest and meeting people. I meet people who I have similar thinking as them. And we have same business philosophies, and we figure out ways that we can help one another. Well, I say that this being a podcast guest is networking on steroids because that's what's happening when I'm becoming a guest on podcasts. And that's what's happening for a lot of our clients. So it's not about going for the biggest listenership or the biggest name in the podcast industry. It's about finding people to be a guest on their show and to connect with them where there's a similarity and there's an alignment with the way that you think about business. Like the fact that you are like, yes, delegation, yes, work less, make more. It's like that.
Yes,
there we go. There's alignment there. You and I get one another. There are opportunities that can happen beyond this. So it's really looking at this as a networking strategy and meeting people that are serious about entrepreneurship, which as a podcast host, I think you can say, like, if an entrepreneur is going to bite off a podcast, they're pretty serious about it.
Yeah. Yes, they're even more than serious. I think they're passionate, or they wouldn't go through that, because it can be nerve-wracking probably to, go on a podcast.
Exactly. So I've been able to meet some really incredible people. And as a result, my business has grown. And so it's been a really cool journey for me. And it was a happy accident that I have been able to look back and really figure out, okay, why did that work? What was the method? And now we teach it to our clients and get them booked on podcasts themselves.
Perfect. So let's go ahead and dive in a little bit into the details. Like, is there a business or a type of personality that you think would not be good for this strategy of going and being a podcast guest?
You definitely have to be comfortable in front of a mic, with a microphone in your face. There are a lot of podcasts that the video never sees the light of day, and I've had some clients say, I do not want to be on a podcast where I'm going to be on video. But I think that for me, sometimes that's a little bit of like, well, I don't know. Maybe you need to get more comfortable being on video, because even if videos don't get broadcast, there has to be this level of comfortability showing up and having a conversation. So you have to be able to talk about what you do in a confident way. You have to know who it is that you serve and what you do for them. And you have to be able to explain that. Not saying that those are things that you have to be able to do flawlessly from the beginning, because that's
Correct.
not going to happen.
Part of being confident in something is having done it. And
Right.
So the more you do it, even if it's not the greatest, as
Right.
you continue to do it, you do get better and better. Like, that's just a byproduct.
Yeah, exactly. And, I have found though, that the people that come to me and say they're interested are usually
For sure.
ready to do it. The person that's,
Especially if they're going to outsource and pay for this service,
yes,
they want to do it.
yeah. And there are so many different podcasts. I mean, podcasts are popping up left and right, that the industries that you could work in or be a podcast guest in, there are so many. Our area of expertise is working with entrepreneurs who serve an entrepreneur audience. We have some outlier clients who we've worked with, but that's really our sweet spot, because entrepreneurs are listening to podcasts and entrepreneurs want to connect with other entrepreneurs. Like, it's just this really wonderful environment.
I have a podcast and a YouTube channel. So this will be on both, of course. But the funny thing is that I have people that have been listening to the podcast either on their daily walks or when they drive somewhere, because usually entrepreneurs like to, kill two birds with one stone oftentimes.
Yeah.
And somebody says, oh my gosh, I didn't know you had a YouTube channel. I'm like, well, my podcasts are my YouTube channel, so you haven't missed anything per se. But if you want to see me rather than listen, you can totally do that as well. I would agree. I would agree with that totally. So why don't you share some tips on like what other benefits, let me say, what are other benefits that are being to on a podcast, and why do you suggest this for clients beyond the ability to get business?
Yeah. So I guess we can go more granular and go into some of the specific things that I have seen happen out of being a podcast guest. And I know that we kind of touched on this a little bit before. And so I want to hear you chime in too, if that's okay, because I want to hear about your experience on the host side, because I think that's so cool. So I will start with the one that's my favorite. Okay. So that is when you're a guest on a podcast, being invited into the next level of the podcast host business. So podcasts by nature are a free medium, right? People listening to this have not paid to listen to this podcast. We listen to this to kind of gather more information. But if you can get invited behind the gates of paid clients, so the person that you're talking to, if they are serving people in like, they're doing a paid mastermind group, or a group coaching course, or a membership area, or they have like a client portal where they have educational resources for their clients. Getting invited into something like that for me has been the most lucrative thing that I've done in my business. And I chalk it up to this: podcast listeners, not to say that all podcast listeners are not buyers, because there are buyers that listen, but the people behind the gates of having paid to be there
program. Yes.
Yep. Those people, we know that they pay for additional service. They pay for shortcuts. They pay for, additional knowledge about whatever it is that you're teaching them. So getting into those areas has been the most lucrative for me, but you can't get there until you network your way in, usually. And this free environment, being the podcast guest, is where you kind of prove your expertise to the host and to their audience, and they want to hear more from you. So it's a little bit easier. Well, I would say a lot easier to then get invited behind those gates.
Yeah, for sure. I think podcasts, for anybody listening, but also anybody having a guest on, is a way to increase your knowledge, right? And when you're talking or speaking with someone or listening to somebody, you either vibe with them or you don't. And when you do vibe with them, then they want to spread your information wide. And sometimes that means in their paid programs or their memberships or things like that. And that's where I've grown the most in my business, was just by doing something for free, like a podcast. Sometimes you're paid, of course, but doing things for free sometimes are a way to not just prove your knowledge, but also give back. Yep. And I think when you're giving back, you're the most authentic, and that's usually when relationships grow the most.
Exactly. And that's goes into some of the tips that we give to our clients going into podcasts. And one of those tips is just share without holding back. Like, this is the environment where you just need to open all the doors to your business, talk about your methodologies. We write talking points for our clients, and one of them is we want to include our methodologies so that we're proving to the world that we know how to do what we do. Because let's be honest, anybody could YouTube or Google pretty much everything we're doing. And so what's the point in trying to pretend like the stuff in our head only we know? This is an environment where we really need to show up to give and to serve. And I think that's why I ended up being successful doing this and happened upon it, because when I became a podcast guest originally, I just wanted to share. I wanted to share some of the lessons that I had learned. My heart was that I just wanted to be giving. And so even if you're going into this knowing that it could be like a client attraction strategy, you still have to have your heart in the right place.
Mindset, yes. Your mindset
Otherwise,
needs to be on giving.
Exactly.
Why don't you share a few ways to increase visibility and credibility by being a podcast guest? In other words, what are some ways that you help people create that visibility and credibility. Because a lot of people come to me and say, oh my gosh, I would love to have a podcast, which I'm sure a lot of people come to you and say, I would like to be a podcast guest. Are there any ways that you can increase that credibility or even maybe confidence to jump in and do something like that?
Okay. So I feel like we're talking about a few things when it comes to like getting the confidence to do it. I would say that there's a lot of value in starting with people that are on a smaller playing field or appear to be on a smaller playing field, because you don't necessarily know what playing field somebody's on just based on their podcast, because the podcast is just one platform that somebody's on. But I want to share that being on quote smaller podcasts, or I think not smaller, let's say newer podcasts is the best way to say it.
For sure.
Being on newer podcasts is you bring more confidence to the table because it doesn't feel like there's as much pressure. The host is usually more flattered that you would want to be on their podcast. And so you're able to ride a lot of excitement that the podcast host brings to the table, which is, for me, has been very fueling for my confidence when I was in the beginning stages. And then, not to scare you, but to be in the beginner podcast or newer podcast, what also happens is if that show starts to get traction, podcasts are like Netflix. So you discover a new show and you go back to the beginning and you binge. So they're also really valuable because to be one of the first 10 episodes, you actually get a lot of bandwidth from people that come on and start listening even years later, which I've seen. So that's kind of, I don't know if that's going to make people nervous. Like, who knows who's going to listen to this?
I mean, obviously, like I talk, what I share is about Pinterest, and Pinterest changes so often that some of my information from 2 years ago is not the same strategy that you do now. And that always worried me, but people know the date of a podcast. Typically they know if it's one and they're on podcast 357, they know that it's older. What it does is it gets people to end up going to your social media or your website and finding out more. It's kind of a part of that know, like, and trust that clients go through in potentially working with you. So I had to let that go.
No, that's good.
Let it go.
I have my own version of it. And that is when I started being a podcast guest, I ran a virtual assistant agency. So we did different things for our clients than we do right now. But here's what I've noticed is people are still curious and they feel like they connected with some of the things I talked about. And even if that doesn't work, I've built connections with those podcast hosts and I stay in contact with the podcast host. So even as my business has pivoted, those relationships are still intact and there still are referrals that are going on. There are still invitations into, group coaching programs and all of those things. There's introductions to other podcast hosts, like all the networking benefits from the early days are still in play because I've nurtured those relationships. So that's something that I don't want to discount either. If your business pivots, it's all right. This is about networking.
Okay. Yeah. And talk to me a little bit about like you talked about tracking or staying in contact with the hosts. What is a way that if someone wasn't hiring you at this point, what is a way that they could track that? And what type of things are you tracking? Because I know one of the reasons is you want to know where you have been on so that you can have that information on your website. That also instills a confidence in someone on your website that knows you've been on a podcast. And a lot of people think if you've been on a podcast, you kind of must be a big person. And that's not always the case, but that's that impression that it leaves.
It is.
Tell me a little bit about how somebody can go about doing that and what to track.
Yeah. So you're asking me something that also kind of goes back to the thing that you asked me before, and that talks about credibility. So the two things here. So one, let's talk about credibility, and then let's talk about making sure to nurture so that we're building on everything.
Perfect.
And I'm saying it out loud so you can remind me if I get off track too.
Wait, what was I going to say?
What was I going to say? Okay. So the first thing is a lot of us are spending a lot of time online trying to prove to the world that we're wonderful at what we do, right? The moment you're able to take a piece of content from a podcast interview that you were interviewed, and you can then take a 60-second, 90-second, 3-minute clip from an interview and then post that, you're no longer having to figure out how to brag for yourself. You've essentially got the podcast host giving you that stamp of approval, and the way that your existing audience sees you immediately gets elevated. So if you've been on any podcast as a guest anywhere, regardless if you're new, if you're seasoned, whatever it is, and you can find like a 60-second clip where you sound really good, publish the heck out of that thing. Share it with your newsletter, share it on, Instagram, Facebook, picture, wherever you are, share that, because it's going to elevate who you are, how people see you, the kind of expert that they see you as. The other thing is, it's a really great way to create content. So every interview that you do can be repurposed into 4 or 5 different pieces of content. You've got your own unique voice when you're showing up as a podcast guest that can be repurposed in all kinds of ways. So I really see this as potentially the top of a content creation funnel.
Yeah.
And it makes delegating content creation a whole lot easier. So, and it inherently builds credibility on the platforms that you're trying to build a new community. So fresh authority for yourself there. So I want to make sure to touch on that.
Yeah. It also, like when I'm on a podcast, I also create a blog post about it, because then you've got all these external links that are also on your blog post, and you're getting SEO traffic from all of that.
Yes.
So that's amazing. And then to finish up that sort of thought process, we want to talk about nurturing those podcast hosts, and the way that somebody might track it.
Yeah. So I am not very fancy in the technology that I use. Having run a virtual assistant agency, we tried like different, we were on Asana, we were on different things, and my business just doesn't need it anymore. We do everything in Google. So it's like everything's on Google Drive. I have just a simple sheet.
Like a spreadsheet?
Yeah, it's just a spreadsheet. I pay extra for storage. That's like
for storage,
so
but
minimal.
Not for all the parts and pieces that if you change, you have to somehow figure out how to get them into that new system.
Exactly. Okay. Exactly. Yeah. So we keep things simple around here. But my rule of thumb is, or I should say it this way, I feel like I need to be like super honest about this. This is like best practice, which honestly, I have not been great at my own best practice, and I'm figuring out ways to delegate it a little bit better. So I always feel like there's grace here, and it still works even if you're not following best practices. So there's a lesson to be had there too. But best practice is staying in contact with all the podcast hosts about once a month. Now, this looks like a variety of different things. It could mean being on the email list of the podcast host and simply once a month replying to an email and saying like, oh my gosh, this was a really great piece of content. Don't just like,
not just, hey, how are you? Yeah.
Yeah.
People don't have time for that.
But genuinely read one of their, weekly emails that got sent out. And if you have value from it, tell them that you got value from it, forward it to somebody else. If you have somebody in your network that would be a good networking contact, make an introduction. When you make introductions in your network, you look like a hero to 2 people and you essentially did nothing. Like, hey, so-and-so, meet this person.
That is, exactly. And it's a compliment and a help for another business. So that's
exactly.
Amazing.
Yeah. I like it because I'm always looking for ways to help, and I'm connected with various people that need various things. And if I can introduce 2 people that could get value from one another, like, I think that is really fun. I actually have a story where one person that I met online I introduced her to a friend that I had in real life, and then they ended up being roommates down the line. Very bizarre. That
is hysterical. I have so many stories like that too. So I'm glad I'm not the only one.
Yeah. When your online world and your in IRL world collide, it's so funny. But so let's see, we had talked about responding to a newsletter, showing up on somebody's social media feed, leaving a genuine comment, sending them a direct message when they post like a story on Instagram. Very simple things. In our client portal, for our clients, we have a couple things. We have, like notes that you take after you're on a podcast. So it includes things like, what's a personal piece of information that this person shared with me? Somebody said, hey, I'm having a birthday party for my 3-year-old. Like, you could always follow up. Hey, how did that birthday party go with your 3-year-old? The other thing is who is in their network that I would love to meet. This is big for us that we do with our clients. So maybe Jen, you've interviewed somebody that I'm like, oh my gosh, if I could just meet that person, write that person down. Maybe at some point our relationship will get to the point where I can say, hey, how did you meet them? Can you give me an introduction? Don't necessarily always come out of the gate with things like that, but you want to have that noted there.
You want that you want to start a relationship with them, not see how they can help your business.
Yes.
I think a lot of entrepreneurs, and we giggle, but a lot of entrepreneurs think that that's selling. Or marketing, which is so not marketing, but it's actually building that relationship so that you can then ask, like, I don't remember who said it, and I'm frustrated now, but there's always that give, ask. Give first before you ever ask.
Exactly. So that's my number 3 is who's in my network that would be valuable to this podcast host. The next one is, do they have anything coming up that would be good for me to be a part of? Or do I have anything coming up that they would be good to be a part of? So like, there could be a summit that's coming up and you would want to interview this person for your summit, or maybe they have a summit, whatever that may be. And then everybody gets put in a spreadsheet and those notes are attached. So when you're following up with people once a month, you can see some of these things that you've taken notes on. And so you're not just like trying to remember, what you guys had talked about. You're not trying to figure out how to have a genuine conversation. You're really able to do that. So yeah, showing up by responding to emails, showing up on their news feed, sending a video. There's one podcast host that she sends these bomb videos, and they're like, I love getting them from her. She's really good at just staying on top and being like, hi, I just want to make, say hi. And, she sent one to me for the new year, just saying like, it was really great being a part of your business in 2021. Stuff like that means things to people. Think about what you would do with your friends. That's what we're doing here. It's relationships.
Absolutely. That is so valuable, and not something that I ever thought about doing. And yet it's something that back in my corporate days, when I was doing sales and marketing and we were networking, I would write on the back of the business card of that I'm old, but I would write on the back of the business card 3 things that stands out to me about that person, so that when I do follow up, I know what I remember. I don't have to rely on my memory. So valuable. Yeah. How should someone, I know that you have sort of a different approach to this, so I can't let you go without asking you this. How should someone start researching for podcasts that would be beneficial to them, provided that they haven't already decided to outsource to you?
Yeah. So we have a few different research strategies that we use, and I'll go with the first one that we use most common, and we can dig into the others as well. That's totally fine. But the one that makes the most sense to us, that was like, oh, this is like the way to make sure that you have a slam dunk, is you find somebody else that has been a podcast guest previously, and then you look at what podcast they have been on. So the idea is to find, so for me, I get people booked on podcasts, right? So I know that the people who are hearing about what I do would also relate to somebody else that's talking about some marketing strategies or some PR strategies, or maybe even delegation. So who
outsourcing? Yes.
Yep. So who is talking about those things? And then look at what podcasts they've been on and pitch myself to those podcasts. That tells me that the host is going to probably be interested in my topic because they were interested in a compatible topic. And then I have found that time and time again, I'm like, I get on a first conversation with a podcast host. I'm like, feels like we have so many things in common. And this happens really, really organically when you're using this research method.
That is brilliant. I'm not going to have you go into others because you do have a business that you do by supporting this, but that was super, super valuable. And I really appreciate that. So
you could do that and never do any of the others, honestly, and have tons of airtime.
Like my brain just exploded on that tip. So I'm ready to take notes. So I see that you teach business owners how to grow a 6-figure business with a crappy website and 0 social media presence. Yeah. That's something that you have on your website and that I've heard you talk about elsewhere. My mind kind of exploded a little bit because I know I have clients who outsource to me Pinterest because they don't want to do it themselves. Right. So is it even possible with zero social media presence? I just don't get that.
Yeah, I know. And so many people don't get it. And I will say that I have dabbled in social media throughout the years. I have done social media, and the line in the sand really became a personal thing for me, because I, from a personal level, can't do social media. It's too much.
Yes.
I tend to go into like negative spirals when looking at other business owners, which isn't good for me. I do best when I put blinders on and don't look at what other people are doing. Yeah. And so for me, it's been a very personal choice, but I will give this additional like nuance to that. I am pregnant. And so being a podcast guest is something that requires my one-on-one attention, and then nurturing relationships does as well. So my team and I have been figuring out, okay, what is the next step? And Pinterest is on the list for consideration. We're looking for something that's search. What do you call that?
Search friendly and a positive corner of the internet.
So I still don't want to do social. Like, I'm not really interested in being an influencer or having my name, I'm just not interested in that. But my business, we're looking for another outlet as well. So I will give that full disclosure. The reason though that I have been able to build my business to this point without doing social media is because of leveraging relationships.
So in other words, you're not doing nothing, right?
Correct.
You're not doing social media, but by being podcast guest, that's feeding your business, and you are making revenue from it. So you can say no to social media. Yep. I always feel like when I hear people say, I don't use social media, I kind of take a pause, because you have to be doing some form of marketing, and your form of, and I have other clients who don't do anything but Pinterest, right? And then I have someone who doesn't have a website, but only does Instagram and Pinterest. Like you as an entrepreneur, you get to decide your journey. And if you don't want your journey to include dealing with the Instagram algorithm, as an example, you don't have to, but you do have to have another marketing strategy. And for you, it's being a podcast guest.
Yep.
Just light bulbs everywhere. It's very exciting.
You have to have a visibility strategy. And what I have learned
I like that. I want to repeat that again. Say that again.
Yeah, you have to have a visibility strategy. You don't have a business if you're not visible. So people have to see me somewhere. But what I have found is I would rather show up in other people's corners where they've already attracted people that would potentially want to hear what I have to say, rather than going on a platform where I have to start at zero and begin building up. And the other thing that I'll note there is with that, one of the things that you have to take into consideration, or that you have to realize, is this isn't about selling to everybody that you meet. So I think that some people hear this and they're like, oh, if networking is my thing, then I have to sell to everyone. But math will prove that I'm right. Okay. So Jen, I could be here thinking like, Jen needs to hire me because she needs to be on a podcast. So I need to sell her on my services. Right. And I have an actual real life example. I showed up to a conference and I networked with this one girl. We really, really hit it off. She totally could have, maybe some people would say should have hired me, but she hired somebody else that did exactly what I do. What I realized was that I became the expert in that area in her life, and she began referring the heck out of me, but she didn't want to share the person that she had hired. She wanted them all for herself. So she didn't want to share her VA at the time, but I became the go-to referral for all of her clients that had VAs. And so I say that math proves my point here. The value of that one person hiring you, if you're going to be selling to every one person that you meet, instead just provide value and be a resource and be there to give them as much as you can. And if they then become a referral partner in some way, or you can come in and serve their audience in other ways, the value of that relationship is multitudes more than having just sold to the one person in front of you.
I mean, so being from a distance from that time in your life, I'm sure you look back and are thankful she didn't hire you, because she's not going to share you if she hires you. And so thus you got all of the other business when she referred you out. That is really so smart. And I haven't heard someone say that before. So I love that. You guys, this is gold, what you're hearing right now. And I'm really excited. So I want to, first of all, thank you so much for your not only valuable advice, but your time, because time is money, of course. Tell everybody how they can contact you to work with you if that is something that they're looking to outsource.
Yeah. So our website is yesbossva.com. We have a really quick 10-minute masterclass that just goes over some of our details. And it just talks a little bit about what we do. So that's the best way to contact us. If you're curious, the only place that I have like an active profile is LinkedIn. I do occasionally check it.
No promises.
Oh my gosh. And that is one of the things I'm like, I really should be better about just getting things up there. And we haven't internally developed the system to do it. But maybe if you're listening to this a few months down the road, maybe we've gotten really good about my team getting the content up there. So
never know. You never know. I mean, you do have to prioritize, not just your time, but your team's time as well. Exactly. And you're clearly doing a great job, because I know about you and everything that you do. And I have already referred you, and we're just now meeting. So I'm really excited. And I will go ahead and make sure that all of this information are in the notes below. And if you have any questions, or you want my advice on me speaking with her today, go ahead and send me a message, and I'm happy to vouch for her. She's amazing.
You're so sweet.
Thank you so much, Kristin. I hope you have a great day. And I hope everyone out there goes out and does something good for their business, maybe even hiring Kristin. I'll talk to you later. Bye.